The sun beat down mercilessly on the asphalt of Oak Haven County, Texas, making the heat rise in visible waves. Deputy Sean Harper sat in his cruiser under the shade of a sprawling live oak near Miller's Creek Bridge, sweat dripping down his neck as he sipped lukewarm iced tea. 32 years old, with a permanent scowl etched into his face, Sean was the kind of cop who took pride in seeing himself as judge, jury, and executioner on the quiet country roads. His badge was a symbol of authority, and in his mind, leverage over anyone who dared drive through his county. That day, his boredom was interrupted by the glint of a silver Mercedes G-Class SUV gliding past at just over the speed limit. Sean's dark eyes narrowed. A car like that didn't belong in Oak Haven. In his narrow worldview, expensive always equaled illicit. He pushed the cruiser into gear, gravel spraying as he followed, deciding to wait a mile down the road before flipping on the lights. Inside the SUV, Marcus Bennett, a 58-year-old three-star general in the United States Army, adjusted the seatbelt across his chest. He had just left his favorite cafe in Austin and was on his way to Fort Benning to surprise his son at graduation from airborne school. Marcus's hair was salt and pepper, cut in a meticulous high and tight, a relic from his West Point days. His posture was disciplined, his movements calm, and his eyes reflected a lifetime of leadership, from Kuwait's deserts to the humid jungles of joint exercises. As Sean approached, Marcus noticed the Dodge Charger creeping up behind him, dangerously close. He calmly assessed the situation. This was intimidation, a test of reflexes, not a threat. He tapped the brakes lightly, signaling awareness without provoking. That was all Sean needed. With a grin that carried both excitement and malice, Sean flipped on the red and blue lights, the siren shrill in the thick summer air. Marcus exhaled slowly, rolling the SUV to the shoulder. He put all four windows down, hands resting at 10 and 2, signaling compliance while assessing the deputy's temperament. Sean swaggered up to the window, hand hovering near his holster, leaning down to peer at the tinted rear seat. The deputy's gaze, sharp and accusatory, fixed on Marcus. "Whose car is this, boy?" Sean asked, his voice a faux southern drawl layered with venom. Marcus turned his calm eyes to him. "It's mine, officer." "May I ask the reason for the stop?" Sean barked, stepping closer. "I asked the question. You don't fit the profile. Show me some papers." Marcus reached slowly for his ID. "I am a lieutenant general in the United States Army. My ID is here, and my registration is in the glove box." Sean laughed, a dry, harsh sound. "A general? Step out of the car." Marcus shook his head. "I'm not getting out for a traffic stop. That's not protocol." Sean's expression hardened. "I decide the protocol," he snapped, yanking the door open. Marcus exited, towering over the deputy. The hot asphalt pressed against his boots, the sun reflecting off the hood of his SUV. Sean ordered him onto the hood, the handcuffs snapping shut on Marcus's wrist with a jolt of indignity. Marcus felt the violation deeply, but he controlled the rising anger, observing, calculating, planning his next move. Inside his pocket, his secure phone buzzed with critical options. The handcuffs didn't intimidate him. They were an obstacle. Sean, oblivious to the gravity of whom he was detaining, tossed Marcus's ID and registration onto the hood and gestured toward the cruiser, ready to escalate. Marcus followed, careful, precise, and silently counting the cost of resistance. He knew a single misstep would be fatal, but patience and strategy were his allies. The mid-afternoon heat pressed down as Sean forced Marcus into the back of the cruiser, unaware that he was about to trigger a chain reaction that would reach the Pentagon and dismantle his department. The quiet tension was broken only by the sound of metal handcuffs and Sean's overconfident muttering. Marcus's eyes closed briefly, breathing deeply, preparing for the storm that was about to descend. Marcus settled into the back of the cruiser, the metal seat cold against his palms, handcuffs biting into his wrists. Outside, Sean rifled through the Mercedes, tossing Marcus's belongings onto the asphalt as though he was sifting through trash. Dress uniform, duffel bag, laptop case, everything was treated like contraband. The smell of hot asphalt and stale air conditioner mixed with Marcus's rising tension, but he remained composed. He could hear the faint hum of the deputy muttering to himself, imagining a score, imagining authority. The phone in Marcus's pocket was a lifeline. He could bypass local systems and connect directly to the Pentagon if needed. He tapped the screen subtly, preparing for the worst-case scenario. Sean returned, a triumphant grin smeared across his face, holding Marcus's secure phone. "Let's see who you're calling," he sneered. Marcus's heart didn't race, it calculated. He had seen worse in desert storms and jungle operations. "Officer, I need to make a call to my command," Marcus said calmly. Sean laughed, dismissive. "You're not in command of nothing here, boy. We'll see who you know later." As he peeled out onto the road, Marcus could see the Mercedes left unsecured on the shoulder, doors open, trunk gaping. Sean was reckless but predictable. The plan had to unfold carefully. Marcus employed a controlled breathing pattern. 4 seconds in, hold, 4 seconds out, hold, box breathing. He slowed his heart, focused his mind, and considered the consequences of every action. He was in a dead zone of authority, at the mercy of an officer who didn't understand the law, the Constitution, or the military. The Oak Haven County Sheriff's Department was the perfect storm of overconfidence and incompetence, but Marcus had options. A call to Major Vance at the Pentagon would trigger rapid response, but he had to create the space to make that call. Sean's aggression continued unchecked as he bragged about finding drugs or cash, neither of which existed. Marcus allowed the deputy to believe he had control. He leaned back, hands cuffed but posture erect, eyes scanning, calculating each threat, each tactical error Sean made. When they arrived at the Oak Haven County Sheriff's Station, the air was thick with tension, and the first drops of a summer thunderstorm spattered against the cracked parking lot. Sean dragged Marcus inside, ignoring the worn, tired booking sergeant Mabel, who looked at him with growing unease. The station smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant, fluorescent lights flickering above. Marcus, still calm, let Sean parade him past the deputies lounging outside. He could feel the eyes on him, the perception of power shifting subtly. Inside, the chaos intensified. Sean's attempt to pry open Marcus's encrypted laptop case drew a sharp intake of breath from Mabel. She knew the man sitting in handcuffs wasn't just any driver. His posture, his calmness, betrayed decades of leadership and authority. Outside, the thunderstorm rumbled, the heat mixing with tension, sweat, and adrenaline. Marcus made his move, speaking to Mabel quietly, requesting the phone. With a hushed gesture, she slid the receiver across the desk. Marcus dialed directly, bypassing local operators. In Arlington, Virginia, Major Vance answered swiftly, recognizing the signal instantly. "Major," Marcus said, voice low, measured, commanding, "Code Black. I am being illegally detained by local law enforcement in Oak Haven County, Texas. Secure materials are compromised. I need immediate intervention from JAG and military police at Fort Benning." The calm certainty in his tone cut through the chaos, a quiet storm of authority. Every action was precise, deliberate, like a chess master setting the board. As Mabel watched, Marcus's plan set into motion. The storm outside mirrored the storm he was orchestrating inside the building. Karma, he thought, wasn't coming. It was already present in the form of military intervention on its way. The tension was electric, the station unaware that their every move had been monitored, logged, and would soon have consequences far beyond their understanding. Sean continued his destructive rummaging, blissfully ignorant of the chain reaction he had triggered. The distant roar of helicopters, the pounding of rain against metal, and the approaching footsteps of federal intervention were all inevitable. Marcus remained seated, hands cuffed, mind sharp, the storm within and without preparing to converge on Oak Haven County in a moment of reckoning. The first low thrum of helicopter blades vibrated through the walls of the Oak Haven Sheriff's Station. Marcus felt it before he heard it, a deep resonance that rattled the coffee mugs and made the fluorescent lights flicker. Outside, the storm had intensified, wind whipping rain across the cracked asphalt, but nothing matched the precision and inevitability of the military response en route. Marcus watched Sean continue to fumble with the laptop case, hammering and prying, oblivious to the gravity of the breach. Every strike against the encrypted case was a federal felony, a fact Sean couldn't comprehend and certainly couldn't foresee the consequences of. The back of Marcus's neck prickled as he imagined the colonel from Fort Benning stepping into the room. He could almost hear the sharp orders cutting through the chaos. Hands up, weapons down, move. Inside, Mabel stood frozen, witnessing both the deputy's arrogance and the escalating danger. She had worked in law enforcement long enough to know when someone wielded real authority, and Marcus radiated it effortlessly. "Sir," she whispered, voice quivering, "do you need—" Marcus cut her off with a single calm gesture. The phone. He had already initiated the direct call to Arlington. The line rang once, crisp and formal, before Major Vance's voice answered. "General Bennett, I see your location. Situation confirmed. Tactical units are inbound. Stand by for secure intervention." Marcus exhaled slowly, controlling his pulse. Every movement in the station, the deputy's erratic searching, the sergeant's hesitant gaze, was noted and catalogued. Outside, the Black Hawk helicopters screamed across the storm clouds, their rotors whipping rain into a blinding haze. Humvees tore up the gravel toward the parking lot, doors opening to reveal soldiers in full tactical gear. Their presence was both intimidating and precise. Every step rehearsed, every rifle trained, every movement coordinated. Sean's arrogance faltered the instant the first shadow crossed the broken glass of the front doors. He froze, caught between instinctive defiance and the recognition of overwhelming force. Inside, Marcus finally relaxed his hands slightly, letting the cuffs press into his wrists as a reminder of the stakes. His calmness contrasted sharply with the deputy's panic. "You've underestimated the cost of arrogance," Marcus murmured to himself. Minutes later, the front doors burst open with a force that made the walls tremble. Soldiers flooded the station, voices commanding and unwavering. "Hands, now!" The deputies froze. Sean raised his arms instinctively, lips moving in silent protest as two red laser sights pinned him to the floor. Marcus remained seated, observing every tactical step, cataloguing each potential threat, the room now a chessboard under federal control. Sheriff Hayes staggered from the back office, rain dripping from his hat, recognizing the impossibility of the situation. Marcus rose slowly, shoulders squared, presence commanding. The officers and deputies in the room were dwarfed by the aura of authority Marcus exuded, a man whose entire life had been forged in situations far more dangerous than a summer storm in Texas. The soldiers moved with precision, pulling Sean to his knees, securing him with zip ties. Marcus finally allowed himself a slight nod, acknowledging the execution of his plan. Outside, the storm continued, lightning illuminating the helicopters as they hovered in formation, creating a visual warning that this was no ordinary intervention. Mabel breathed a sigh of relief, glancing at Marcus, understanding for the first time that her role as a gatekeeper of procedure had just allowed the correct authority to restore order. The breach, the humiliation, the tension, all converged toward a single outcome. Justice was imminent. Marcus's mind was already racing through the next steps. The handover of secure material, the containment of federal violations, and the restoration of dignity. Outside, the soldiers began moving the deputy toward a Humvee. Marcus watched, tall and unshaken, as the consequences of years of unchecked power fell like rain upon the arrogant officer. Karma, Marcus reflected silently, had not been delayed. It had arrived with deliberate, calculated force, a storm he had merely guided with precision. The room, though still chaotic, was under control, and Marcus's presence made clear that the law he served was far greater than any badge hanging on a wall. Sean Harper struggled against the zip ties, thrashing uselessly on the linoleum floor, his pride colliding with the reality of federal authority. Outside, the rain pounded the roof, mixing with the wail of helicopter blades. The room had become a crucible of accountability, each second measured and precise. Marcus rose from the metal bench, adjusting his navy polo, the cuffs pressing into his wrists. He walked toward Sheriff Warren Cole, a large man with a graying mustache, who trembled as he held up his hands. Marcus's voice was calm, each word deliberate, commanding attention. "Sheriff, it is clear your department has allowed misconduct to flourish unchecked. You are now accountable for the actions of your subordinates." Cole swallowed hard, nodding, sweat streaking his face despite the air conditioning. Behind him, Mabel quietly observed, her role as booking sergeant shifting from powerless observer to participant in restoring order. Marcus's eyes flicked to Sean, who glared at him with a mixture of fury and disbelief. "Deputy Harper, your attempt to intimidate and assault a superior officer and your tampering with classified equipment constitutes federal offenses. Marcus said, tone firm but composed. "You will answer to the appropriate authorities." The soldiers outside began escorting Sean toward the waiting Humvees. He kicked and shouted, but the precision of their training left no room for resistance. Marcus returned to the center of the room, his calm presence dominating the air. He reached for his battered laptop case, now slightly scratched from the deputy's earlier attempts, and inspected the encryption with meticulous care. This device contains sensitive operational data for the Eastern Seaboard. Unauthorized access could compromise national security, he said, his voice low but carrying weight. Sheriff Cole nodded, fear etched into every line of his face. Marcus had dismantled the illusion of control that had governed the county for years. Outside, the helicopters hovered like specters, rotors throwing rain and dust in chaotic arcs, a physical manifestation of the authority Marcus had summoned. The Blackhawks and Humvees symbolized the tangible reach of justice that Sean and the sheriff had underestimated. Marcus's calm gaze swept the room, cataloging each face, each reaction, each subtle sign of guilt or innocence. He had fought countless battles on foreign soil, but this battle was for justice on American soil. It required strategy, patience, and unwavering discipline. As he secured his materials, he gave a brief nod to the lead colonel coordinating the operation. Marcus knew that immediate containment of the deputy and restoration of federal oversight were essential. Every second of delay increased risk, yet Marcus had orchestrated the outcome with precision. "Prepare the transport for secure custody," he instructed, tone clipped. Outside, the wind gusted harder, bending tree branches as rain slashed the parking lot. The visual chaos mirrored the internal chaos that had defined the sheriff's department for decades. Marcus moved past Sean, whose futile struggle had ended, toward Sheriff Cole. "You will cooperate fully with federal authorities and ensure that all records, vehicles, and seized assets are accounted for and returned or preserved according to legal standards," Marcus continued. Cole's nod was nearly imperceptible, but it carried the weight of compliance. Marcus's measured control extended beyond immediate danger. It reached into the bureaucratic and ethical collapse the county had allowed to fester. He signaled to the soldiers, who began methodically documenting evidence, ensuring every misstep was recorded for federal prosecution. Marcus observed silently as Sean Harper was loaded into the Humvee, his arrogance stripped away by circumstance and authority. It was a tableau of accountability and consequence. Power wielded without integrity met power enforced with precision. Marcus's hands flexed against the cuffs, mind scanning every procedural detail he would relay once in secure custody. The storm outside began to abate slightly, revealing slivers of sunlight breaking through the clouds. It felt symbolic, as though justice had cleared the air, leaving room for clarity and resolution. Marcus exhaled, letting a fraction of tension leave his body. One battle had concluded, but the work to restore integrity across the department was just beginning. Sean Harper, defeated and humiliated, had been removed. Sheriff Cole's complicity had been exposed. Marcus had won this engagement without firing a shot, relying instead on authority, strategy, and the inevitability of justice. The aftermath in the Oak Haven Sheriff's Station was almost surreal. Rain had ceased, leaving the parking lot slick and reflective, the scent of wet asphalt mingling with the remnants of chaos. Marcus Bennett stood tall, finally free of handcuffs, his posture unyielding as he surveyed the room. The deputies who had not been swept into the federal operation now sat frozen, understanding for the first time the magnitude of what had just unfolded. Mabel, the booking sergeant, approached cautiously, her eyes wide but grateful. "General," she whispered, "what happens now?" Marcus's voice remained calm, carrying authority without anger. "Now we secure every item that could compromise operational integrity, and we ensure that every procedural violation is documented. This department will be held accountable for years of misconduct." Outside, the hum of helicopters had faded, leaving only the occasional distant rumble of rotors retreating. Soldiers were organizing Sean Harper for transport, ensuring that he was removed from county jurisdiction without incident. Marcus watched quietly as the arrogance in Sean's posture dissolved into defeat. It was a reminder that authority without accountability is fragile, and even the boldest misjudgments have consequences. Sheriff Warren Cole approached, rain dripping from his wide-brimmed hat. His hands trembled as he held Marcus's secure laptop and personal phone. "General, I understand," he said, voice shaking. Marcus took the items, inspecting them briefly. "You will cooperate fully with federal authorities, ensure full transparency, and prepare for an inquiry into your department. Every vehicle, record, and asset will be scrutinized. Non-compliance will be met with immediate legal action." Cole swallowed, nodding rapidly, knowing there was no room for argument. Marcus then walked outside to the slick asphalt, glancing at the silver Mercedes G-Class SUV. The scratches from Sean's desperate prying caught his eye, but he did not dwell on them. The vehicle was secondary. The principle, the accountability, was primary. Soldiers began sweeping the vehicle for any tampering or tracking devices, a meticulous process that left no room for error. Marcus's son, David, a private first class at Fort Benning, arrived moments later, soaked from the storm, his uniform pressed and neat despite the weather. He approached his father cautiously, sensing the gravity of the morning's events. "Dad," he said quietly, voice tinged with concern, "are you okay?" Marcus allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I'm fine, son. Everything is under control." David's eyes scanned the scene, the escorted deputy, the trembling sheriff, the federal soldiers. The reality of the situation settled on him. A mix of awe and pride. Marcus explained briefly, without delving into sensitive details, that the enforcement of integrity sometimes required intervention beyond local jurisdiction. The Black Hawks were now distant dots in the sky, their mission complete, but the ripples of accountability were far from over. Inside the station, Mabel began assisting federal personnel, documenting every irregularity and ensuring records were preserved. She felt a newfound respect for Marcus, realizing that authority exercised with intelligence and restraint could restore order where corruption had thrived. Marcus checked his watch. The operations at Fort Benning and the Pentagon were already coordinating follow-up actions, ensuring that the Oak Haven County Sheriff's Department would undergo full federal oversight. Justice was moving deliberately, systematically, without room for compromise. The lesson for everyone present was unmistakable. Unchecked power leads to its own undoing. Outside, the sun broke through the dissipating clouds, casting a pale light on the soaked parking lot. The storm had passed, but the consequences of the morning's actions would echo for years. Marcus exhaled, the tension leaving his shoulders in slow, measured breaths. Today, accountability had been enforced not with aggression, but with strategy, authority, and an unshakable commitment to principle. Even the defeated deputy and the complicit sheriff could not alter the trajectory of justice now set into motion. Marcus glanced at David once more, pride softening his features. "One day you'll understand the weight of responsibility," he said. David nodded, gripping his father's shoulder, silently acknowledging the lessons embedded in this storm of consequence. The first phase of resolution was complete, but Marcus knew the work ahead. To restore dignity, enforce lawfulness, and rebuild trust would require vigilance, patience, and continued leadership. The following morning, the streets of Oak Haven were quiet, but the silence was heavy with anticipation. Word had spread quickly about the military intervention at the sheriff's station, and the locals whispered as they went about their routines. Marcus Bennett, now in a plain grey suit, stepped into a secure conference room at Fort Benning, his dress uniform reserved for ceremonies. His son David was with him, fresh from the barracks but briefed on the unfolding situation. The team of military lawyers and civil rights attorneys flanked Marcus, their faces a mix of anticipation and determination. Across the table, representatives from Oak Haven County looked small, intimidated by the presence of someone who had orchestrated the intervention with precision and authority. Marcus's voice carried across the room, calm but cutting, a clear signal that he had no patience for half measures. "This is not about money," he said. "This is about justice, accountability, and restoring integrity. Your department failed in every measure of lawfulness. You will correct that failure, or the federal government will take control." The county representatives stammered, glancing at one another, unsure how to respond to the unwavering authority in the room. Outside, in the county jail, Sean Harper sat in solitary confinement, stripped of badge, uniform, and rank. The sterile white walls reflected his disbelief. He had believed himself untouchable, above consequence. Now he was inmate 4920, facing the reality of federal prosecution and a potential life sentence. The contrast between father and son's composure at Fort Benning and Sean's isolation in Atlanta was stark, a study in the consequences of choices and integrity. Marcus reviewed the documentation from the sheriff's office, ticketing records, seizure reports, and patterns of abuse. Every fraudulent stop, every planted charge, every misused authority was logged, catalogued, and ready for federal action. He knew that restoring justice required not only punishing wrongdoing, but also ensuring that the victims, those subjected to illegal stops and seizures, received restitution. His mind flashed briefly to the Oak Haven residents, families who had lived in fear of predatory law enforcement. They would have their day, and Marcus would ensure it. At Fort Benning, the lawyers and Marcus drafted a formal class action suit and federal consent decree to dissolve the sheriff's department and transition policing authority to state oversight. Every word was deliberate, designed to enforce systemic change. Marcus glanced at David, pride evident but tempered with solemnity. "Integrity is not inherited, son," he said quietly. "It is earned, maintained, and protected, and sometimes it requires decisive action." Outside, news crews began arriving in Oak Haven, helicopters hovering to capture footage of federal vehicles and soldiers enforcing the law. The story was already national, but Marcus remained focused, aware that public perception must align with justice, not sensationalism. The storm had cleared, but the work had only begun. Marcus prepared for a series of briefings with the Department of Justice and military oversight committees. Each step would solidify the lessons of accountability and send a clear message. Abuse of power would not go unchecked. As the day progressed, the sheriff's office was sealed, records preserved, and federal agents moved efficiently, documenting evidence. Marcus observed every action with tactical precision, ensuring compliance and safeguarding sensitive materials. By evening, the first wave of actions was complete. The deputy and sheriff were in federal custody, the department was under temporary state oversight, and the victims of past abuses would soon see restitution. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the satisfaction of a plan executed flawlessly. Yet even as the sun set over the quiet streets of Oak Haven, he knew that vigilance was essential. Justice had been served, but maintaining it required constant attention. The morning storm was over, but the ripple effects, the structural and ethical rebuilding, would continue. Marcus turned to David, a small smile breaking through the professional gravity. "Come on, son, let's make sure the rest is done right." David nodded, understanding both the responsibility and the privilege of witnessing integrity in action. Weeks later, Oak Haven County was unrecognizable from the chaos of that summer day. Federal oversight teams had taken control, auditing every department record, every seized asset, every questionable stop. The predatory ticketing and discriminatory practices that had defined the sheriff's office were exposed, catalogued, and corrected. Marcus Bennett watched the process unfold from a temporary command post in Austin, coordinating with legal teams, federal investigators, and local authorities. Each decision was deliberate, ensuring that justice was thorough and systemic, not symbolic. David Bennett accompanied him on some of the visits, observing how accountability was implemented at a structural level. Marcus explained the importance of transparency and proper chain of custody, using real-life examples from Oak Haven's corruption to illustrate broader principles. Meanwhile, Sean Harper remained in federal custody, isolated in Atlanta, his once inflated ego shattered. Each report, each recorded violation, each witness statement contributed to his understanding, or perhaps disbelief, at the consequences of abuse. Marcus never sought revenge, but the law executed what human arrogance could not: tangible consequences for years of misconduct. In Oak Haven, the community began to breathe again. Families reclaimed vehicles previously seized under fraudulent claims. Tuition records were restored for students affected by false charges, and local businesses that had feared harassment could operate without intimidation. The ripple of restored justice spread, reinforcing the principle that accountability strengthens rather than weakens society. Marcus's legal team worked tirelessly to formalize the consent decree, ensuring that the Oak Haven Sheriff's Department would be dissolved permanently and replaced by a state-monitored police force. Every clause, every article was crafted to prevent future corruption, embedding mechanisms for transparency and independent review. The magnitude of Marcus's influence was not in punishment, but in the restoration of dignity and systemic reform. One evening, Marcus returned to the quiet of his Austin home, reflecting on the series of events. He thought about the arrogance of Sean Harper, the complicity of Sheriff Warren Cole, and the resilience of the Oak Haven community. Justice, Marcus mused, was not instantaneous. It required planning, patience, and resolve. He looked at his phone and saw a message from Major Vance confirming that all secure material had been accounted for and that federal oversight was fully operational. Marcus allowed himself a brief smile. Across town, Sean Harper sat in a sterile cell, staring at the walls, grappling with the reality of federal incarceration. His sense of invincibility had been stripped, replaced by the understanding that integrity and lack thereof has consequences. Marcus's phone rang, breaking the quiet reflection. It was a briefing from the Pentagon, summarizing the legal, operational, and ethical outcomes. He listened intently, absorbing the details, ensuring no step had been overlooked. As the call ended, he leaned back in his chair, allowing the weight of the resolution to settle. David entered, carrying a folder with updates on restitution payments and departmental audits. "Looks like they're making progress," he said. Marcus nodded. "It's more than progress. It's a precedent. Abuse of power anywhere now has a clear cost, and integrity has been reinforced." They looked at each other, father and son, sharing a moment of quiet pride. Outside, the Texas sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky with gold and crimson. The warmth of the day mirrored the restoration happening in Oak Haven, a community emerging from corruption into accountability. Marcus knew this was not the end. Oversight and vigilance would continue, but the system had been reset, and the message was clear. Integrity matters, and the law, when wielded wisely, protects those who serve faithfully. As night fell, Marcus allowed himself one final reflection: power unchecked corrupts, but power exercised with principle strengthens society. Oak Haven was proof of that truth, a hard-earned victory for justice, dignity, and order. Months passed, and Oak Haven County began to heal under the watchful eyes of federal and state oversight. The streets that had once been punctuated by fear and aggressive traffic stops were calmer, the predatory speed traps removed, and community policing initiatives implemented to rebuild trust. Marcus Bennett returned periodically, overseeing the ongoing reforms, ensuring the lessons of the past were not forgotten. His son David accompanied him during some visits, learning firsthand the delicate balance between authority and accountability. Inside the county, former deputies and officers had been reassigned, suspended, or terminated, and new personnel were trained under strict ethical guidelines. The citizens, particularly those previously targeted by biased enforcement, began to regain faith in law and governance. Meanwhile, Sean Harper remained in federal custody, serving as a cautionary tale for others. He had time to reflect, or at least to recognize the consequences of his arrogance. Marcus never gloated, but the equilibrium of justice had been restored, and that was enough. One afternoon, Marcus returned to the bridge where the initial confrontation had occurred. The silver Mercedes G-Class, now fully inspected and cleared of any tampering, gleamed in the afternoon sun. He paused, taking in the empty shoulder where the deputy had once lurked. Memories of the handcuffs, the threats, and the violation of dignity pressed briefly against his mind, but they were tempered by the knowledge that justice had been delivered and integrity restored. David joined him quietly, the two standing together, father and son, reflecting on the journey. "It feels different now," David said, eyes scanning the road. "Yes," Marcus replied. "This place has changed because we made it change. Accountability works, but only if you enforce it deliberately." Marcus gestured toward the distant skyline, the soft glow of the setting sun illuminating the landscape. "This is what leadership looks like. Not in power for power's sake, but in responsibility for others." David nodded, understanding both the weight and the privilege of what they had accomplished. That evening, Marcus reviewed the final audit reports from Oak Haven. The redistribution of seized assets was nearly complete. Restitution checks had been issued, and federal oversight measures were firmly established. The sheriff's office, once a symbol of impunity, had been dissolved, replaced by a transparent structure under state supervision. Marcus reflected on the ripple effect. Families who had feared authority now trusted it. Students had regained their educational paths, and the community had been restored. The lesson was clear: unchecked power breeds corruption, but principled authority can correct it, systematically and definitively. As night fell, Marcus and David drove the Mercedes slowly down Route 27. The air smelled of pine and wet asphalt, a sensory reminder of the storm that had catalyzed change. Marcus allowed a small smile. The bridge, the oak tree, the empty road. They were all symbols now, a reminder that even the smallest acts of arrogance could provoke consequences, and that integrity, patience, and strategy could prevail. David glanced at his father, proud but aware of the hard lessons embedded in every mile. Marcus's hand rested lightly on the steering wheel, a quiet command of both machine and circumstance. The night was still, but the sense of justice lingered, tangible and deliberate. Marcus knew this victory was not just personal, it was systemic. Oak Haven had been transformed, and the principles he had fought to uphold would resonate beyond the county's borders. As they drove into the horizon, the quiet was not empty. It was the hum of restored balance, a reward for patience, intelligence, and unshakable commitment to lawfulness and ethics. The morning sun over Fort Benning cast a crisp golden light across the parade grounds, illuminating the precision of 500 soldiers standing at attention. Marcus Bennett sat in the VIP box, his dress blues immaculate, a chest full of ribbons reflecting decades of service and sacrifice. Today was not about the recent conflict in Oak Haven County, though the lessons from it lingered in his mind. It was about his son David, standing rigid in formation, ready to graduate from airborne school. Marcus's heart swelled with pride, but it was tempered with reflection. Less than 24 hours earlier, he had been handcuffed and humiliated, his secure equipment compromised by a local deputy's arrogance. Yet here he was, calm, composed, and witnessing the culmination of his son's dedication. The ceremony unfolded flawlessly. Orders were given, commands executed, and the formation moved with mechanical precision. Marcus's gaze was fixed not on the routine of military ceremony, but on David's posture, the way he carried himself with dignity and discipline. Marcus leaned toward Major General Harrison, seated beside him, and Baiskati Istradis Asaitin, and whispered, "Your boy looks sharp." Harrison nodded. "Better than I was at that age," Marcus replied, his voice quiet but proud. The thought of Oak Haven and the chaos of the prior week flashed briefly across his mind, reminding him of the fragility of authority when integrity is absent. As the ceremony concluded, Marcus descended the steps, moving through the crowd of soldiers and family members. David broke from formation, snapping a crisp salute, which Marcus returned with a firm bear hug. For a moment, the general was simply a father, proud and unguarded. "I'm proud of you, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. David smiled, unaware of the full extent of the prior day's ordeal. "Thanks, Dad," he said, eyes shining. "Did you drive the SUV?" Marcus's mind flicked to the silver G-Class, now secured and cleared by federal investigators. "Not today," he lied smoothly. "Government transport issues." They walked toward the barracks, father and son side by side. Marcus reflected on the recent events. The overreach of a local deputy, the systemic corruption of the sheriff's department, and the measured, lawful response that restored integrity. Every action had been deliberate. Every decision calculated to uphold the law without compromising principle. Oak Haven was now under federal oversight, and its citizens were on the path to justice. Marcus's gaze lingered briefly on the distant roads, remembering the handcuffs, the threats, and the stormy skies. But the anger had been replaced by satisfaction, the knowledge that wrongs had been corrected and dignity restored. As they reached David's unit, Marcus allowed himself one last reflection. Integrity, intelligence, and courage can triumph over arrogance and corruption. He had not fired a shot, yet justice had been enforced. The weight of responsibility had been met with measured action. The training ground, the orderly formation, the proud faces of young soldiers, all were reminders that disciplined leadership and ethical authority ripple far beyond immediate events. Marcus put a hand on David's shoulder. "You know, son," he said, "the road to justice isn't always violent, but it is precise, and patience, strategy, and integrity make all the difference. David nodded, absorbing both the lesson and the pride embedded in his father's words. Marcus took a deep breath, the crisp air filling his lungs. Today was victory, not of power over others, but of principle upheld. The future of Oak Haven, of its people, and of his son's generation had been safeguarded by the deliberate exercise of authority rooted in ethics, law, and unwavering commitment to justice. After the graduation ceremony, Marcus, Bennett, and David walked toward the vehicle that would take them back to Austin. The air was cool and crisp, a stark contrast to the stifling heat and humidity of the events in Oak Haven just weeks before. Marcus took a deep breath, letting the calm wash over him. He had overseen the dismantling of a corrupt sheriff's department, ensured justice for the victims, and restored integrity to a system that had abused its power. David slid into the passenger seat of the Mercedes G-Class, a medal pinned proudly on his uniform, reflecting the sun. Marcus adjusted the mirrors, checked the roads, and began to drive down the quiet streets, the city waking slowly around them. "You really didn't take the settlement money, Dad?" David asked, glancing at his father with curiosity and respect. Marcus shook his head. "No, son. Integrity is worth more than money. Freedom, dignity, and justice are priceless." They drove in silence for a few minutes, the hum of the engine and the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze the only sounds. Marcus allowed himself a small smile as he glanced at David, remembering the events that had brought them here. The deputy's arrogance, the sheriff's corruption, the federal intervention, and the careful orchestration that had restored order. Each step had been calculated, each action deliberate. The Mercedes turned onto Route 27, approaching the old shoulder by the oak tree where it all began. Marcus slowed, letting the car roll to a gentle stop. David looked around, recognizing the familiar scene from the stories his father had recounted. "Why are we stopping?" he asked. Marcus leaned back slightly, gazing at the empty spot. "Just checking the perimeter," he said, voice soft. He reached into the center console and pulled out his phone, the background image showing him and David fishing at the lake, laughing together. It was a reminder of calm, patience, and the life that persisted beyond conflict. Marcus reflected on the anger, the tension, and the threat that had been present that day. The rage had been replaced with the quiet satisfaction of justice served correctly. He put the car back in gear, the twin-turbo engine purring as they continued down the open road. "Deputy Harper asked me a question that day," Marcus said, breaking the silence. David looked up, intrigued. "What did he ask?" "He asked me whose car this was," Marcus said, a chuckle escaping him. "And I told him—" He paused, letting the moment linger. "It's mine." David smiled, understanding both the literal and symbolic meaning behind the words. The open road stretched ahead, free of traps, free of corruption, a tangible testament to the outcomes of patience, strategy, and ethical action. The father and son drove into the fading sunlight, leaving behind the shadows of Oak Haven, the storm of injustice replaced by calm and order. Marcus's mind was at peace. He had fought a battle not with violence, but with intellect, principle, and unwavering courage. The lesson was clear. Authority must always be tempered with accountability, and integrity is the true measure of power. As the Mercedes roared forward, the wind in their hair and the open road before them, Marcus glanced at David and said, "Remember this, son. True strength comes from doing what's right, even when it's hard." David nodded, understanding the weight of the lesson. Together, they drove toward a future brighter, fairer, and shaped by justice. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and share this video.